Welcome back to Let's Make a Game, a channel about making computer role-playing games using the free program Twine and the Sugarcube format for Twine. In this video, I would like to continue talking about my current project of coding the combat system for a viewer's game. In particular, I'd like to talk some more about coding the companions acting. So we have, as you can see, a combat here that I've set up. I've scrolled or clicked through it until it's the companion's turn. We have a companion here, and we can see down the bottom that it says Companion 2 chooses the attack Shoot. That makes sense because, as we've discussed, everyone on sort of our side, on the player's side, has pistols at the moment, and Shoot is one of the options that you can do with a pistol, of course. And then we can see that they roll a 1 and a 2 plus their sneaky score of 3. Well, that makes sense because we can see that they are a scoundrel who has a sneaky score of 3, minus the target's sneaky score of 1, which again makes sense, for a total of 5. And if you do the adding up, that works out. 1 plus 2 plus 3 minus 1 is indeed 5. And as we would want from a 5, it says failure. And then they choose another attack, which is Pistol Whip. And this time they find that there's no enemy in range and decide to move, which again makes sense. So what I've added to that, a lot of that is stuff that we've already seen, but the new thing is that the companion can now choose an attack and the attack actually gets made, whereas in the previous video it was just that they were choosing a particular attack, and then if there was someone in range of that attack, nothing happened. We hadn't got to that yet. So I'd like to spend the rest of the video talking about how that works. So oops, there we go. Okay, so you might remember that we have this when we were doing the player character attacking. We had a page called PC Side Attacks, and it was called that rather than being called Player Character Attacks because it was coded in such a way that it would work for both the player character and the companion, so that we don't have to do two separate passages, which would be very, very similar. And that's what we've made use of. We've linked this page, Companion, where the companion's choosing what they're going to do, with this existing page of PC Side Attacks, and we've done that by creating an intermediate page, Companion Target, which is where the we go if there is at least one enemy within range of the chosen attack. We then have to choose which enemy, because there might be more than one. And this is the page where we do that. And then when we've done that, we go to PC Side Attacks. I did also make a small mistake in my previous video, or an omission. So I'll start from there and correct that. And then we'll go to here. I won't talk much about this one because I've already talked about it when we dealt with the player character attacking, and it just works in basically the same way. There aren't any new variables this time. We're only using existing variables. So let's go back to Companion. Let's zoom in a little bit. As you will remember, we first check whether the companion is prone. If they are, their action is going to be to stand up. We find the distance to the closest enemy. Now, we need the meaning of these variables to be the same as they are in the PC Side Attacks passage. In other words, the PC Side Attacks has this little note that says Z is the target and X is the weapon name plus a number. So something like Pistol 1 or Pistol 2. And we have to set it up so that in Companion, that's what Z is going to be, and that's what, that is what Z is going to mean, and this is what X is going to mean. And I didn't do that in the previous video. I sort of forgot that I should have done that. And so I've changed some of the names of the variables. The code is the same, except that I think this used to be X and now it's Y, for example. But that's not a substantial change. What is a substantial change is this. There's a note here that says enemies with flying tag are considered to be at minimum of mid-range. This is something that we've discussed before. The enemies that you're fighting are giant mosquitoes. They're sort of hovering in the air, and the mechanical consequence of that is that even if they're at close range, if they haven't taken any damage yet, they're considered to be at mid-range because of the height difference. So I neglected to take that into account. And we do that with this little if statement. We say if enemy Z2 4, Z2 is the enemy that we're looking at. So if enemy Z2 4 is equal to capital Y, then we set Y2 equals math.max Y2 3. So what does that mean? Well, Z2 is the enemy that we're talking about. As I said, NME is the array which keeps track of most of the details about the enemies, one of which is whether they are still flying, and that basically means whether they've taken damage yet. There's an exception for the pupae. They don't have the flying tag, but the ones that you will encounter most of the time, the adult males and the adult females, start with this tag and lose it if they take any damage. So, and that is stored in enemy, the number of the enemy 4. So if that equals capital Y, because we keep track of this, it was easier to keep track of this with text than we could have done it with a 1 and a 0, for example, but I just found it slightly easier to do it this way, and also slightly easier to tell what's going on. It's obvious that Y means yes, whereas it might not be quite as obvious that 1 means yes and 0 means no, for example. If that's the case, then we set Y2, which is the distance between the enemy that we're looking at and the companion who is acting. We set that to be math.max Y23, which means it's the higher of its current value and 3. In other words, if it's less than 3, bump it up to 3. In other words, they're at mid-range. 3 range bands is what mid-range means. So having done that, the rest of it is as we've talked about before. We see whether the closest enemy is within range of the attack that we've chosen, and if so, we go to companion target, which is where we're going to pick which enemy we're going to attack. This works very similarly to when the enemies are choosing which player character or companion they're going to attack, but of course the variables are different because the details are stored in different places. So we set Z to be a random number from 1 to enemy underscore max, which is the maximum number of enemies. If the hit points, which is what enemy Z2 is, again, enemy is the main array where we keep the details of the current set of enemies. If their hit points are less than 1, well, that's obviously not a companion that we can target. It's either dead, i.e. it was in this combat, but it's been killed, or it was never there. So we're looking at slot 10 and there's only 3 enemies, something like that. And if that's the case, we've picked a slot that we can't use and we therefore include companion target. Well, this is companion target, so it just means essentially go up to the top of the page and start again. Pick another one. Pick another value for Z. Otherwise, okay, we've got a valid enemy. Let's find the distance to this enemy and store it in the variable Y. We set Y equal to math.abs, the absolute value, meaning if it's a negative number, multiply it by -1. It's the difference between com ini underscore who 3 and NME Z3. So com is sort of the equivalent to NME. It's where we're keeping the details of the companions. ini underscore who is the currently acting character, which is in this case a companion. And $com something 3 is where we keep their position. expressed as their relationship to the player character. So the player character's position is always 0. If com ini underscore who 3 is, for example, 2, that means that for some reason that companion is 2 range bands ahead of the player character. And then enemy Z3 is the equivalent slot for the position of the enemy. And then we take into account the flying tag. If enemy Z4 is equal to Y, this is obviously very similar to the code on this page here. If enemy Z4 is equal to capital Y, then we set Y equal to math.max Y3. In other words, if they're 1 or 2 or 0 range bands away, but they are still flying, then set their range to 3. Then we say if Y, the distance to the enemy, is greater than WEA underscore ATT x1 times 2 plus 1. Well, WEA underscore ATT stands for weapon attacks. X is something like this. It's pistol space 1, pistol space 2. When we add other weapons, it'll be flamethrower space 1 or whatever. And slot 1 in that array is the range, and it's stored as 0 for close, 1 for mid range, and 2 for far range. But to translate that into range bands, we multiply by 2 and add 1. So 0, 1, or 2 becomes 1, 3, or 5. So what this means is if the distance that the enemy we've chosen, if how far away they are is greater than the range of the weapon, then we do this. Well, they're out of range, so we've picked someone that we can't attack, but obviously there is someone that we can attack because we wouldn't have got here unless there was at least one enemy within range here, because this page, companion, is the only one, or this passage rather, companion, is the only one that sends us to companion target. So if we end up here, we know there's at least one in range. So therefore we don't give up, we just try again, which means include companion target. So once again, same as this line here, essentially go to the top, start again. Or if it's not the case that Y is greater than this weapon attack slot times 2 plus 1, well, that means we've picked an enemy that is in range. And if that is so, we go to PC side attacks. And we don't need to do anything sort of extra, because when we coded PC side attacks, we coded it to work for both companions and player characters. So it should, unless there's some mistake that I didn't notice at the time and is going to come out as we test it, and that's always, that's always the case, of course, that those sort of mistakes will come up somewhere anyway. But for now, we just need to go straight here, and then that works exactly the same as when the player character was attacking. We have the same note up here, which tells you the target. We work out the attacker's persona, what attribute we need to add. We roll dice, we add and subtract the relevant things, and then we act based on what the total is. Is it a long failure, a success, or a long success? And then once we've done that, we go to, if we need to, we check if the combat is over, or what will happen more usually is we go to the next action. So either the companion will get their second action, or that was their second action and that's the end of their turn and it's the next person's go, or they were the last character acting and, well, not person, I suppose, because some of the characters aren't people. The next characters go, I suppose I mean. Or they were the last character acting, and then we have to re-roll initiative and set it up from the start. Let whoever gets the best roll act first, and so on. And that's how we do that. So I still need to work out, I still need to code the companions moving. That's going to be slightly more complicated because the companions have a sort of morale score. They have a sort of how much trust they have in the player character, and that might affect whether they decide to sort of run in or whether they decide to retreat. We also need to have the option for the player character to tell the companions stuff they should do. And we also, there's a few other things we need to add, most obviously to do with extra weapons, and also when the companion or the player character has a critical failure or a long failure, the person whose game this is has told me they want a different system for that, and which will depend on what weapon they're carrying. So those are all things that we are going to look at in the future. I don't know what order I'm going to do them in, but for now, I hope that was useful or interesting to at least some of you, and I hope you will tune in next time.